We need to thank the Dollar Foundation. We are part of the Lake City Creative Alliance. Our fields came through. We could have had it at the McNair Memorial building, but we would have to limit the people, and I didn't want to do that. So we're having it here at our fields, and let's see what happens. Dale Smith is associate director, and if it was not for Zach Smith, we couldn't have had it tonight. No way. And thank y'all for coming out in the storm. I mean, at 6 o'clock, it came down. And Sam Mack and I were looking outside, and it was flooding. I mean, rain was coming on the side, and the wind was blowing and everything like that. We are going to talk about 1942 tonight. Morton Adoles is the mayor. He has been re-elected for 4 or 5 times. He became mayor in 1938. Now it's 1942. We have Mr. Louis Probst, which is Sam Mack's grandfather, Sid Rittenbaker, Mr. Ben Cook, Mr. R.L. Coleman, Mr. Forrester, and Mr. Edgar Whitehead. In January of 1942, we have a breakout of the measles. And we have 175 cases. And from January the 1st to the end of January, Mr. Edgar Whitehead's son, named Little Billy, was 10 years old, caught the measles. Went to the Whitehead Infirmary, and he died February the 4th. He was just 10 years old. Building in 1942, now this is on the onset or in the beginning of World War II. And we'll be talking about not the battles of World War II, some of the guys that will be going into World War II tonight. We have Mr. H.J. McFadden. His house is the one that has the columns on East Main Street, right across the street from Hoyt Carter. Hoyt Carter's house is now owned by Johnny and Sarah McDaniel. Mr. Emmett Patrick, which is on William Street. Pat Coleman lived in that house. And then Mr. Venro DeBose on Lakedale. And I was talking to Mr. Venro one time, and he said, yeah, I live in Mortgage Heights, okay? And this was in January. Mr. Roy Floyd actually saved my life when I was 7 years old. He came up with the idea of having a drugstore. He probably didn't know anything about being a druggist, so he hired Dr. G.C. Rogers. Also, this guy right here is Cotton Tomlinson. And this is Mr. Rogers. And then Mr. Floyd, in 1950, sold it to Mr. Edward Roper in 1950. And that was my hangout when I used to go to junior high. This is the basketball team. Lake City sports and basketball during this period of time wasn't too good. Baseball, they did pretty good. Basketball, not so good. Football, not so good. But baseball was, Lake City's been a baseball town ever since I can remember. This guy right here is Sonny Hagan. This guy right here is Carol Godwin. This is Charlie Graham. Also, this is Mr. Richard Abrams. Now, also the girls in the front row are the varsity. The girls in the back row, which doesn't have a uniform, are the JVs, okay? And we got people like Mary Lawrence Gaddy, Marion Gravely, who is Mr. Randy Gravely's sister. This is Miss Mary Lawrence right here. Okay. Fire breaks out at the Star Warehouse. And now this is in February. It burns it almost to the ground. 60 bales of cotton, 300 tons of fertilizer. Okay, this is in February. The value of it was $150,000 in 1942, which is equal to $2.5 million in Lake City. I cannot believe that much money floated around in 1942. And that was just one warehouse, and we had 5 warehouses. And they were also had cotton and fertilizer in it. Okay? Mr. W.A. McLaren, Sam Mack's uncle, the warehouse was had a value of $75,000, so just take half of $2 million and a half. So you got a warehouse that costs $1.5 million. Okay? Keep in mind, this is in February. See what happens. Mr. Ernest Post became postmaster, and when I read this, I couldn't believe it. How many times did we have mail come into Lake City? One time a day. It goes to Florence and then goes to Columbia and back to Lake City. That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay? New service. The business district would have 2 deliveries each weekday. One in the morning and one in the afternoon. Then, on Saturday, it will come one time in the morning, and none on Sunday. Why can't we do that today? It's amazing. That's Billy Poston's great uncle. Mr. Ernest's brother died, and he took in 7 children, his nieces and nephews. And one was Mr. Jim Poston, Mr. Lannis Poston, a guy named Sap Poston, okay? Mr. Harold Poston, all that bunch he had when he was living on Carolina Avenue. March 26th, they rebuilding the Star Warehouse, and it's going to be ready by tobacco season. That's amazing to me. And it's over there where the Citizens Bank was. We have a cannery. Okay? We have a agricultural teacher and a home economic teacher that decided to have a cannery. And we would can vegetables during the produce season. And it would be centered at the old schoolhouse where the city complex is today. Mr. J. Paul Trueluck and the Board of Trustees and the aid of the county superintendent and the county delegation gave money to create the cannery. We had parades all the time in Lake City. We had the Army Parade, okay? The Home Guard. We had 100 members of the Home Guard from 1941 to 1945. The Home Guard became known as the National Guard, okay? And we have a guy named Captain A.M. Bowen, who is Janet Bowen's father, Phyllis Bowen's father, okay? He went to West Point before my brother Jamie went to West Point. And he had to leave West Point because he had bad eyes, and he didn't go back. Now, this is during the time where, in 1942, when we had Doolittle's raid on Japan, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, Battle of Midway, and so forth. Gas masks. Okay, everybody's scared now that the Japs and the Huns from Germany would come and gas us. This is the scare of World War II. So we have a guy that came. He was a graduate of the Chemical War School in Maryland to talk about the proper way of wearing a gas mask, and they expected 400 people. Now, Lake City had a population a little bit more than 2,000 people in Lake City. Remember that now, okay? So we had about, an eighth of the people that come. You got to include the children, okay? The Civil Compensation Corps. It was one of Roosevelt's New Deal type deal. The guys that were 18 to 25 looking for a job, they found a job. This is 1933 to 1942. And these are the scenes of the camp in Browntown. The faculty. Miss Askins, Miss Lizzie Gravely, they were there forever, you know? Especially Miss Emily Askins. I had Miss Gravely in the 10th grade, and then she retired. I think it was because of me, I don't know. That bunch of wild people we had in the class of 66. So. The baseball team. We got some people, Mr. Donald Jones, Mr. Marion Poston, Howard King. They had about enough to have a whole team. They couldn't scrimmage, so their record was something like 2 wins and 8 losses. This is the Cannery. We have a young guy named James Batten that ran the machinery. And it said that he started canning at 3 o'clock in the morning and failed to clean the floor of all the orders. He ran it by himself. And this is the old school that's at the city complex. We had 40 people to graduate in 1942. Half of them were boys. Where you reckon they went when they graduated? See Uncle Sam. And some of them went to college to get out of, okay. We had Mary Lee Flowers, who became Mary Lee Roper. Margaret Kennedy, that became Margaret Perrin. John Ward, that lived on Oak Street. My Aunt Rachel. Zola Godwin. Who in the world is Zola Godwin? That's Brooks Godwin. He's 97 years old now, and his mind is sharp as a tack. And these are the pictures of the seniors of 1942. That's Mary Lee right there. That's Mr. Zola, Mr. Brooks. And when he graduated, he said, within 2 or 3 months, he was saluting the American flag. If you hadn't, I'm going to give a little ad right now. If you hadn't seen this guy's video on living in Lake City and the war, it's on YouTube. Just punch in Lynches Lake Historical and Museum, and get you a dry towel, okay? It's moving.
Can't slow down.
Okay, this is Randy Weaver's mama. This is Miss Margaret Perry. This is Charles McLean. Susan Shirley told me that Mr. Marion Post was known as Marion in high school. He went to the Citadel. They called him Sap. And he hated that, but it stuck. And everybody called him Sap. And his brother Vernon. Okay? These are Mr. Hal Poston and Mr. Jim Poston and Mr. R.L. Poston's brothers. This is Charles Rose's sister, Louise. The Lake City plant. Now, if you hadn't been with us lately, when I showed this, would you believe that Carter Manufacturing Company made coffins? Made coffins. Caskets. Caskets, okay? It burned in June of 1942. $25,000. Now, had 50,000 crates on hand, and it wasn't enough. Remember, it was in June in the middle of the produce market season. What is he going to do? In the war, he can't get supplies, so Mr. JV, I'm going to tell you a little something. I got another slide I'm going to show you first. Okay. We had a blackout in town. Okay? They had a lookout on top of this building here, the City Hall. And they had, that they would look out for airplanes. Japanese planes or German planes. Had a picture of all the planes, you know. And at 9:20, the lights went out. And it was total black. And it lasted until 10 o'clock where they had a all clear signal. And it was a success. Okay, and it was Lake City's first blackout. Dr. J.D. Whitehead, if you ever go up to see the museum at the Whitehead Infirmary, you look at the wall, 1942, 1943, there's not many people born. The reason why, Dr. J.D. is human. He got sick too. Okay? He was had a serious attack of what? Sciatica. Okay. And it lasted several months, and he had to be at home. So they had to close the hospital in 1942, in July. Anybody born before that period or maybe after that period is not up on the wall. In June 1942, Mr. Carter said, I'm going to rebuild. He had to go to Washington to get supplies to build the Carter manufacturing. During the war, remember we had rationing going on. How many of you had Mr. J. Dan Bushard? Okay. It started in 1942. And this is the school he started at. Now it's the Lake City Elementary School on Main Street. Every time I look at it, I get sick. The back opening, it was a big deal. I mean, we got a station from Charleston come down to broadcast the grand opening of the 1942 tobacco season. It was something special because we didn't have TV. We had the radio all the way in Charleston. So it was, you know, in the PD area, and I probably went to Sumter. Mr. Henley McIlvaine, which is Mr. Henley McIlvaine Jr.'s father, he and other merchants in town wanted to have a celebration of the tobacco season. So they had a committee. They had the Firemen Band. Firemen Band? What in the world is the Firemen Band? It's not the Lake City High School band. It was a group of people like Dr. White, Harry Whitlock, and some other folks that got together and decided to form a band, a city band. And it was sponsored by the Lake City Fire Department. So they called it the Firemen Band. And they played, and people would have tickets to go to the picture show. What was the picture show at the time? 1942. The Ritz Theater. Okay. Where the Ritz Theater Park is today. Okay? And also the swimming pool. You got a ticket, you go free. War bonds. They had the Firemen's Band, had people like Mr. Paul Spivey, Edgar Floyd, and some more. And they marched down Main Street to the Ritz Theater, marched down the aisles of the Ritz Theater, on stage, and played God Bless America. And then we had a prayer, Dr. Parks, Dr. Abrams, which was before Mr. Brickell, and they were selling war bonds. And they raised $6,500 in a short period of time. Something else. The Methodist preacher, though, said in 8 months, the average of donation to the churches, black and white, was $1.72, whereas legal whiskey or alcohol was at $7.52. What were your priorities back then? Had a lot of stress back then. This is the football team. Played 6 games, lost 2. Okay? Actually, we got John Ward, Sap Poston, McCrae Eady, Richard Abrams, Mr. Jim Moore, Jack Hicks. He died in World War II. And after that season, the coach left and went to Lancaster. The state came up with an idea that the buses were to transport the children back and forth from school. We didn't have activity buses. So what they had to do was they had to ask the parents or somebody else to transport the athletes to and from a sporting event. Twinkle Toes, Mr. Herb Rollins. Memorial Stadium at Clemson was inaugurated in 1942. Herb Rollins was the first opponent to score a TD. Okay? He was a sophomore. And the Southern Conference started in 1942. Not the Atlantic Coast. What am I trying to say? Atlantic Coast League Conference, right? Okay. But he was known as Twinkle Toes. The Lake City Band, basically the same folks that was in everything else, because some of the guys that were getting ready to go to war, whatever. This is the rationing. You had to have, you could have money, but if you didn't have a rationing stamp or a coupon, you couldn't buy anything. Okay? So they issued out coupons to certain people. Dr. Herman Singletary, that was a doctor, got 5 gallons a week, whereas this lady here, Miss Singletary, got 1 gallon a week. So they had to limit, also with sugar and other, other objects.
Gallon of what? Gallon of what?
Gallon of gasoline. And then they would write down what you got. And I told you it was 2,500 folks that live in Lake City. In November, we voted 15 votes, and all straight Democrat. Okay? Franklin Delano Roosevelt appointed James Burns, who was governor of South Carolina, to the Supreme Court. He didn't make it. Okay? But Maybank, Governor Ernest Maybank, filled the governor's shoes, and he was elected later on. And Mayor Morton Adoles, this is his last time. Okay. James, how many people go to the Baptist church?
That's a high number, about 350 regular.
Okay? Now, in 1942, if you didn't go to church, you were frowned upon. Okay? 57 new members in 1 year. Okay? The total membership in 1942 was 709 folks. The Methodist Church had over 300. The Presbyterian had over 200 at the time. So nearly about half, or maybe more than half, of the folks that lived in Lake City went to church every Sunday. Students returned back to college. Mr. Ed Roper, James Richardson, Charles Timmons, which is Dr. Thad Timmons' brother, Mr. Hoyt Carter Jr., he's going to die in World War II. Ms. Helen Richardson, Sarah Hagan, which became known as Mrs. Herb Rollins, and Catherine and Sybil Epps. James Percy Whitlock went to Clemson. Dot Mapp, Dot Cockfield went to Furman. Next time we're going to be talking about 1943, 1944. Thank y'all for coming. Okay.
So many of these articles from News and Curry and the Charleston Evening News, one or two, all the information seems
They had a correspondent that come to Lake City and the surrounding area. They might have a PD area reporter, and he would go to different towns finding out what was it. Florence Morning News, we were the stepchild.
and you didn't get more
you know, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank y'all so much for coming tonight.